Learning about customer obsession, the what, the why, and the how. But first, let's start with a little bit of news. Customer experience quality is, alas, down. At Forrester, we measure customer experience quality at hundreds of brands every year with a massive survey of tens of thousands of customers. We call it the CX Index. And we score companies' CX quality on a scale of 0 to 100. In 2021, the average in the US was 72 out of 100. That's okay. It's not vile, it's not grotesque, but 72 is like the bottom of a C, the top of a D. I wouldn't be happy with that score, that's not great. And then this year, it dropped. It dropped to 71.3. Now, what you may be thinking is 72 to 71.3 out of 100, that's a drop of 0.7, big deal. However, this is a really finely tuned instrument. And a 0.7 point drop in average CX quality amounts to not only a statistically significant, if you're doing the math, but also a deeply meaningful for customers and companies decline in CX quality to the tune of a loss of tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue as a result of declining customer loyalty. And this average decline in the US, by the way, we saw it internationally in most places as well. This decline wasn't just the result of, a few companies having big losses or something like that. You've read the slide already. 10 out of 13 of the verticals we cover in the US saw declines. 2 out of the other 3, by the way, were flat, and 1, if you're in the wealth management industry, congratulations, you're in an industry in which a couple of brands managed to eke out some small gains and, technically speaking, raise your average. That's nothing to really celebrate because the entire context here is declining CX quality. Now, let's take a look at a particular kind of CX, digital CX. We cover 15 different channels of interaction. We divide them into digital. This is digital stuff. This is your IVR, your mobile app, your website. What we call non-digital or physical. This is brick and mortar. This is on the phone with a live person. This is things like that. And then hybrid. Customer experiences in which people use channels, at least one digital and one non-digital channel to interact. And I'm going to mention digital in particular because, of course, that's been the almost laser focus for most companies for the past few years. In 2021, it was 69.7 out of 100. That's below the average of 72 back in 2021, so below average anyway. Well, after another year of, in some cases, single-minded focus on digital, 69.3. Both statistically significant and meaningful. Again, we can do the math here and show tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue for companies as a result of lower customer loyalty because of weaker CX. Right. By the way, non-digital and hybrid down too, down across the board. There's a further issue here, which is that CX differentiation is decaying. In 2022, 75% of brands are within 5 points of that average of 71.3. The point spread is diminishing year over year over year. Why is this happening? Well, a couple things going on here. Many of the weakest brands, not many, but a few of the weakest brands, are solving some basic CX problems and getting slightly better. While at the same time, very few brands that are already performing well are getting any better. They're in most cases flat or in a few cases backsliding. And so the point spread narrows, 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 to the point at which hardly anybody's CX is meaningfully differentiated anymore. Is that good for anybody? So what's going on here? It's a declining focus on customers. That's the problem. Now, a lot of times when CX quality declines, whether overall across the whole economy or maybe within one particular company, it's easy to point to rising customer expectations, right, as the reason. In fact, some people even say things like skyrocketing customer expectations. Now, we survey hundreds of thousands of consumers around the world every year on this. Consumer expectations have never skyrocketed. They continue to climb upward at a stately pace every year, just as they did the year before. Across verticals, by the way, right? It doesn't matter if you're B2C or B2B or B2B2C. I do a lot of work with our public sector clients personally. We see it in the government sector. It doesn't matter where. Stately upward progression. And CX quality doesn't decline every year. So if companies can deal with rising customer expectations in some years and not in others, it's not rising expectations that's the problem. Our research shows that companies are less focused on customers now than they were a year ago. In 2021, 10% of companies were what we call customer obsessed. There's that word for the first time. I'm going to say more about what customer obsession means in a minute. But for the moment, it'll suffice to say, I just mean companies focusing everything they do around providing value to customers because of the business value you get in return. Now, 10% isn't a lot in 2021, but it's a lot more than the 3% we see this year. How do we get that number? We survey senior executives at 1,500 companies, and we ask them, well, it's a battery of questions. Frankly, I'm shocked we can get 1,500 people to answer all the questions we ask them, but they do, and I thank them for it, maybe with some of you, actually. And including a battery of questions there designed to assess how well the organization puts customers at the center. It's a diagnostic study. And so 10% down to 3%. Clearly, this is a key piece of evidence showing less focus on customers. Now, okay, fine. Practically speaking, what does that mean when companies focus less on customers? Well, when customer obsession backslides, you essentially get three big picture problems. First of all, leaders hurt long-term business health without realizing it. What happens here is, when the company is less focused on customers, leaders forget somehow, it's not somehow, we got some ideas on this, but leaders forget how important it is to focus on providing a high-quality, consistent, on-brand customer experience. And so when leaders forget that, they start that overarching inertia of the traditional business world sets in, and leaders start making decisions about maximizing traditional process efficiencies and cutting corners and thinking of customer experience efforts as cost centers rather than as revenue drivers. And so they start to cut back on CX efforts. And when they do that, that's less focus on customers, CX quality declines. I'm going to give you an example, though, of a company that even in the past year, when so many companies' customer focus declined, leaders at this company stayed focused. Barclays. I'm thinking in particular here of their credit card line. Their CX index score, that 0 to 100 scale, improved by 3.5 points this year. That is a big increase. And one of the things that they did here was leaders at Barclaycard, in their periodic meetings, continued to focus on customer insights topics. Right? They didn't get distracted and go into all the kind of inside baseball business stuff. They kept customer insight stuff front and center. Topics like, for instance, the importance, the quantifiable importance of ensuring that their customers can continue to access customer service help when and where they need it, especially vulnerable customers. And there have been a lot more of those in the past couple of years, so that makes it even that much more important. And so as a result of this continued focus on understanding customers and making decisions based on customer insights, rather than getting distracted by the other stuff, leaders at Barclaycard did things like, for example, they changed the minimum payment on credit cards to help people avoid persistent credit card debt. And they made permanent a program to let customers defer payments when necessary because of some legitimate financial hardship, without penalty. That's a sort of customer-focused decision-making that a customer-obsessed leadership can make. Another problem that happens when companies aren't focused on customers. Corporate strategies don't emphasize the customer enough. They don't put the customer at the center. In fact, only 50% of the US Fortune 100 companies make an explicit promise to focus on customers in their corporate strategy documents. I could line up the business performance of the ones that don't with revenue and stock performance, and you would see a direct correlation there. But I'm not going to do that to anybody. But when strategies don't emphasize customers enough, that's when companies lose focus on why they exist. And strategies that don't focus on customers give leaders in those companies a license to make unwise short-term decisions that can hurt long-term business growth. Again, an example of a company that avoided this problem when so many other companies were falling into it. American Family Insurance. They increased their CX index score in the past year by 4.2 points, which is a huge amount. We rarely see an increase that high, especially in a year in which 20% of brands we study had a decline of about that size. American Family Insurance's strategy has been focused for years now on supporting the communities it serves, being a good, community member and as an insurance company, and being, as they say it, welcoming to work for and do business with. And so, as a result of that kind of strategy, AFI stays focused on things like helping to rebuild homes and small businesses, help to repair some nonprofit organizations, actual physical locations of some nonprofit organizations that had been damaged, and providing mental health resources in the wake of some traumatic events, of which there have been some. And also as part of that, improving some EX initiatives, things like diversity initiatives, raising minimum wage, things like that, which can contribute to better employee experience, EX quality, and thus increase CX quality. And the third thing that goes wrong here when customer obsession backslides is operations get, I just called it lazy. What I mean simply by this is, again, there's so much inertia in the business world, so much of which is a distraction from focusing on customers. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about organizational structures or business processes or people strategies or metrics or whatever. And when that laser focus on customers, which is a unifying factor, starts to decay, right, the operations start to decay themselves and go off and wander off in different directions. But not at US Bank. US Bank, they increased their CX index score by 4.7 points. A truly massive increase in CX quality, and the increases to revenue and profitability, et cetera, that go with it. US Bank has not rested on its laurels, right? When operations start to get lazy and start to lose focus on customers, this is when companies coast on last year's CX improvements. It was good enough last year, it's probably going to be good enough this year. But as customer expectations continue to move upward, last year's experience isn't enough anymore. And too many companies have been resting on their laurels. They've been coasting on last year or the year before last. US Bank instead continues to develop and deploy new customer experiences really quickly, and not just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. They've been using good co-creation design methods and things like that, good CX best practices to do so. So it's not just the number that matters, but the good methods that matter. But the number itself is impressive. 170 new features on its mobile app and website over about the past year. 170, that is a big number in any year. And then they've done something even more interesting. Now that US Bank customers can do all of their normal banking stuff online, and adoption is high, so a lot of them are doing it there. US Bank didn't just cut its branches loose or let its branches just kind of sit there as they've always been. Instead, the company is re-coaching and retraining branch staff with a lot of soft skills, a lot of soft customer skills, as well as product knowledge. Because they know that nowadays, if a customer goes into a bank branch, it's because they've got a big issue. They've got a big question. There's some life event happening, some major thing. And branch employees don't need to be able to just help them make a deposit or make a withdrawal or whatever. They need to be able to sit down, talk through the issue, and really provide them with some real solutions for some complex stuff. Make that branch experience count. And so that's the sort of thing that can give a company a 4.7 point increase in the quality of its customer experience in just a year. But wait, there's more. There are 3 factors that are making this whole situation even more difficult to turn around. The first is, surprise, economic turbulence. We already know this. I don't need to belabor this point, but I'll just give you one piece of data. 54% of US consumers plan to reduce spending next year. And of all the economic indicators that all the corporate world can point to, I think this is one of the least discussed but most compelling. People are going to spend less money. Another factor that's making this a more challenging situation is that what I call non-linear, of course I misspelled it, non-linear customer life cycles. I'll give you all a second to find the misspelling because I mentioned it. You're going to find it. You got it? Great. It's always something. During the last few economic crises, last few economic bumps, 2008, 1995, whatever, 2001, customer life cycles were pretty linear. Somebody would discover that they had some need, they'd explore options to fulfill that need, they'd buy something, they'd use it, they'd ask a question about it, they'd decide whether or not to re-engage. And that meant that companies could turn around their difficult CX prospects relatively easily and in silos. But nowadays, with things like subscription-based models and other things, customer life cycles aren't linear anymore. All the different phases are so intertwined with each other. People are using before they're buying. Right? People are re-engaging moments after they first purchased. Right? It's all mixed up together, which means that, and that's a good thing, right? This is a better customer experience. It's also, in many cases, a better business model for companies. But it means that companies, if they're going to turn around a difficult CX situation, they need to coordinate with each other internally, to say nothing of their ecosystem partners, in much deeper ways than they ever have before, and usually in deeper ways than they're prepared to. And so that makes turning the situation around even trickier. And the last piece of the puzzle, unwarranted budget optimism. I and my colleagues have been looking at these numbers since we gathered this data back in August. Look at the percentages of business leaders who expect their department's budgets to go up in 2023. Right? What is it? It's 82% of customer experience leaders, those are the folks I talk to the most, 85% of marketers, right? 66% of IT leaders, but still, right? And in fact, in any case between about 10 and 15% of each of those expect their budget to go up by double-digit numbers. Yeah, that's what I said. But it's good data, comes from major companies. This is something that a lot of business executives perceive to be the case. How can we create a situation in which companies can focus more on customers, and in which leaders can make decisions that focus better on customers, in an environment in which they're not going to have the resources they thought they were going to have, i.e. this, and do so in a sustainable, a reliable, and efficient way? This is a systemic problem that can't be solved in this or that department. Companies have to become more customer obsessed. I said a while ago that I was going to explain what customer obsession is in a couple of minutes. The minute has arrived. Here's what I mean when I say customer obsession. I mean putting the customer at the center of your company's leadership, strategy, and operations. A little bit more on what I mean by each of those. When I say at the center of its leadership, I mean leaders like you have to make different kinds of decisions using different kinds of inputs and actually need to behave differently at work than you may have in the past. You need to do different things. More about that in a few minutes, right? So this isn't just, this is when I say put the customer at the center of leadership, I don't just mean saying that customers are important. I don't mean feeling enthusiastic about customers. In fact, enthusiasm for customers can be a real problem among leaders because leaders can get some idea in their head and not test it and go off and force the company to produce something like Harley-Davidson cologne that nobody wants and that nobody buys. This is a real example. Right. So, focusing on customers in a real and substantive way. When I say strategy, I already mentioned only 50% of the Fortune 100 in the US companies focus on customers in their strategies. And this means big picture corporate strategy documents. You know, the vision, mission, values, if you follow the sort of traditional format, I'm talking about that. Whatever you call your big governing documents. And every sub-strategy that comes from it, your CX strategy, your marketing strategy, your people strategy, your product strategy. They all have to have customers at the center. They usually don't. And third, operations. This is the way the company goes every single day. The data that it gathers and uses. The technologies that it provides to its employees and to its customers. Its structure, its business processes, its hiring practices, etc. And to do this, companies have to infuse leadership, strategy, and operations with these four principles that you see down there in the corner of the screen. They have to be customer-led, insights-driven, fast, and connected. Say a word about each one of these. Customer-led. Pretty much every company is customer-aware. They know they have customers. In many cases, they know things about those customers. Good start, not enough. Companies have to use a deep understanding of their customers, not just their customers' interactions with touch points, but their customers' desires, their customers' motivations, their customers as people, a real understanding of that, to guide big corporate decisions. And the biggest hurdle here tends to be a cultural one in companies, right? Now, there is a data problem, the customer insights problem. There is a coaching problem, yes. But companies want to think of themselves, and many executives want to think of themselves as leaders. And we get this thing in the back of our heads, I've been there myself, where it's hard to square this notion of ourselves as a leader with letting the customer guide us where they need us to go. So a lot of us, even if we have all the customer insights, even if we have the authority, even if we have the environment, that's the last piece of the puzzle there is in our own heads. Second, go from being data-rich to being insights-driven. Lots of data, we all got lots of data. We all got too much data, we use the data we got. Right? Sure. Generating insights from the data, that's the issue. Using a real insights-to-action life cycle. One of the things I see so often is companies in general, and leaders at companies in particular, saying that they're using customer insights. And what they mean is they've cherry-picked a convenient number. Right? That's not a customer insight. Customer insights mean gathering data from all the relevant sources, analyzing it, ideally with the help of trustworthy technologies, to understand what it actually means. Right? And then really grasp those desires and motivations of customers, right? Rather than picking a convenient number or a particularly dramatic number. Third, fast. Sure, that seems simple, but it's a lot harder. What I'm really talking about here is going from this idea of perfection, this idea that we're going to launch some new thing, some new experience, some new service, some new product. We're going to create some new program, whatever. And so we're going to maybe, gather customer insights, sure, great. And then we're going to go in a room for 18 months, and we're going to perfect something, and we're going to come out with an absolute perfect example of something that probably is 18 months old. Right? Instead, companies have to get comfortable iterating. Fast, not perfect. Customers will forgive imperfection if they see progress. What customers hate is not seeing progress. I've been having this same problem for a year, and y'all aren't doing anything about it. That's a bad customer experience that drives people away. If they see baby steps, if they see iterations, if they see work, they like that. Seeing the work itself contributes to the quality of the customer experience. And I know this is another major thing. A lot of us get uncomfortable with this, especially we get worried about covering ourselves in the event that something seems imperfect, right? So, this is, like I said, these are systemic things, these things that cannot be solved in one department by one person. It's about company culture, it's about company processes, it's about company metrics. To make iterating, to make fast, not perfect, okay. Because lots of people want to do it. They're just not gonna, because they're worried about the ramifications it's going to have on their career if something is imperfect, which it's going to be. And finally, from siloed to connected. Now, this is the sort of most, tweeted about sort of thing in business, right? No more silos. Sure, great. We know that part. But we need to expand it beyond that, because it's rare these days that a company provides value to customers in a vacuum, as an island. Right? And companies need to become more connected than ever with their ecosystem partners, because that's the way they provide real value to customers. So these four things, customer-led, insights-driven, fast, and connected, infused throughout leadership strategy and operations, that's the real hallmark of customer obsession. And that's not easy, which is why, last year it was only 10% of companies. This year it's only 3%. Right? Now, why is this so important? How do you actually connect the dots from a company that behaves in this way to business success? Well, it works like this. Customer-obsessed companies do the most important things better. They provide better value to their customers in the form of better products, better services, better experiences around those products and services, which I put a box around because that's my thing, is the customer experience of it all. Now, I know in many of the companies you work in, there are gray areas. What's a product versus this experience and this and that? That's fine. It's all providing value to customers. Now, sometimes when I talk about this, they'll say, well, sure, provide value to customers, but that's costing us money. What does it do for us? Well, what it does is when you provide better value to customers, you get better value back from customers. It's cheaper and easier to acquire new customers and to retain the ones you have, and to get them to enrich the relationship with you, and to get them to recommend your brand, not just to the world in general, but even more importantly, to people who are in the market to buy what it is you sell, to regulators, to legislative oversight bodies, to the news media. Advocate on behalf of your brand. So you provide more value to your customers, you get better value back from customers. Of course, I've got numbers. Of course I do. Customer-obsessed companies, if we compare that 10%, now that 3%, and in previous years, customer-obsessed companies with non-customer-obsessed companies. There you go. Customer-obsessed companies have 2.5 times faster revenue growth. They have 2.2 times faster profitability growth. I really like this stat because a lot of times people will say, okay, I get it, we can grow revenue by focusing more on customers, but That's top line. What about the bottom line? It costs a lot of money to become customer obsessed, doesn't it? Right, and revenue minus his expenses is profit. Am I going to eat up all my profit here? No, you're not. It's more expensive to not be customer obsessed than it is to be customer obsessed. It's more expensive to provide a bad customer experience than it is to provide a good one. Because you're always fixing what you keep breaking for customers. The problem is most companies lack the data to actually track that. 2.2 times higher customer retention growth rate, 2.2 times higher employee engagement growth rate. By the way, I could go on. I could talk about market share, right? I could talk about all kinds of stuff. It's all 2 point something. Got a whole laundry list of it. But what it comes down to is customer obsession is a win-win-win. It's good for customers because customer-obsessed companies provide better value to those customers, better products, better services, better experiences. It's better for organizations because they grow their revenue and their profit and their this and their that. And it's better for employees too because you saw that last number, 2.2 times faster growth in employee engagement. A better customer experience is a better employee experience too. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a company from which I know there were a few folks here, and just landed on this example recently, and so they don't know I'm going to talk about them. But it's Navy Federal Credit Union. Hi, guys. And this is something that I experience myself because I happen to be a Navy Federal Credit Union member for a number of years now. And perennially, NFCU is at the top of our CX index. And now, I have not given all the leaders at NFCU or customer obsession diagnostic study, right? Nor have I spent 6 months with my colleagues delving into every corner of the business. So I'm not gonna tell you that they would be among those 3%. But they probably are. And I'm gonna give you a few examples of the sorts of things that go on at Navy Federal Credit Union that typify the sorts of things that customer-obsessed organizations do. I love this quote from Mary McDuffie, the CEO. Executives are required to listen to customer calls and apply customer insights in their work. Look at that, right? You sit there with the headphones on, you hear the nervousness in the member's voice, you develop empathy for them, you understand the importance of getting it right. Leaders focus on customers. They focus on other stuff too, but customers are at the center of it. One thing I particularly like about this is not only do leaders do this, but employees know that leaders do this. And when employees know that leaders are doing this, they know that this is something that's getting more than lip service. They know it's actually important. Second, strategy. Sure, NFCU has all the, the product strategy and CX strategy and everything else like that, but they put customer members, as their term is, at the center of each one of those strategies. It's not the only thing, but it's the center of gravity in the company's strategies. And third, in operations, just a few examples of some things, right, that I've learned from doing research interviews with folks at NFCU, reading media, things like that. They created an employee user experience team because if employees don't have a good experience using the technology that they have, then they can't do their best work for members. There's a lot of opportunities that NFCU employees have to build empathy with customers. Now, many NFCU members have been in and around the military themselves, right? So there's that empathy to begin with, but not all of them. A lot of them haven't, but the opportunity to build that. And then NFCU is good at giving employees the resources they need. We were hearing about some of that this morning at breakfast, right? To provide in a reliable and sustainable way that focus on customers and hence that good customer experience. And I mentioned autonomy here. One thing that in my conversations with folks at NFCU I've been particularly impressed with is NFCU's efforts to stop the customer experience from becoming too rote. Right? Nobody likes feeling like they're locked into a script, even if they are. And NFCU is good at giving employees an environment in which they can break out of something rote or seem to break out of something rote. That's a good customer experience too. Some examples of the sorts of things I'm talking about. Now, you may be thinking to yourself that customer obsession is a big goal, and it is. And I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is your company may not need to be customer obsessed today. We actually discern 5 levels of customer obsession maturity. It starts at customer naive. You won't find customer naive on there. Only 4% of companies are customer naive. Why so few? They go out of business or they get bought, right? But more than are customer obsessed, right? Then customer aware, customer engaged, customer committed, and then finally fully customer obsessed. And how customer obsessed your company needs to be depends on, roughly speaking, 2 variables. The first you can see across the bottom there is customer empowerment, how empowered your customers are. The second one is, by the way, when I say customer empowerment, I mean how much information do they have? How much autonomy do they have? How much wherewithal do they have to switch brands? How easy is it to switch brands? That sort of thing. Competition. Your traditional competitors, any disruptors that might come in from outside, what's the competitive situation like? And the more empowered your customers and the greater the competitive environment, the more customer obsessed your company needs to be. So you may not need to be fully customer obsessed today, depending on where your company is on those 2 variables. That's the good news. Now the bad news. The bad news is that both of those things are going up pretty much everywhere. Definitely customer empowerment is going up pretty much everywhere. Competition is getting tighter pretty much everywhere. And so you need to think not about how customer obsessed your company needs to be today, but how customer obsessed it needs to be 5 years from now, because it takes a while to make it happen. So, how do you do it? How do you actually become a customer-obsessed company? Well, I could go on and on about this. I'm going to address this from a particular angle here. But before I get to my angle, I want to emphasize what I've said a few times already. This is a systemic, company-wide thing. Sure, of course, it involves your customer-facing technologies and people and processes, the website folks, the customer-facing employees, sales staff, service technicians, of course. But it also involves everybody behind the scenes. Certainly leaders who rarely interact directly with customers, but also your legal department, your IT staff, your security folks, any third-party partners you have, and of course you have them, your cloud payment processor. I put cleaning crew on here. There was a case a few years ago, a retail bank in New York. The cleaning crew came in for the night, cleaned the floors and the other stuff, and they ran out of floor cleaner. This is a true story. They ran out of floor cleaner. So they sent the most junior person on the cleaning crew to the all-night Walmart to get more cleaning stuff. But the most junior person didn't want to stay junior for long. He was a real go-getter. And he didn't buy the officially licensed non-toxic floor cleaner. He bought the floor cleaningest floor cleaner he could find. And he dumped it in the mop bucket, and then he dumped in a couple other things. And then he cleaned the floor with it really well, I assume to a sparkling shine. Then they closed the doors, and it sort of stewed for a few hours until the morning. And then employees come in for work, customers start coming in, toxic gas cloud. Not a good customer experience, not a good employee experience, right? Customer obsession is a systemic issue. Cloud service provider, there's a case, this is maybe 7 years ago now, 6, 7 years ago. Some of you might remember this. I hope you don't. The US government changed a regulation, changed a definition of a certain kind of technology embargo on some other countries. And different cloud services providers interpreted the new regulation differently. And so some cloud services providers cut off certain services to their global business clients. Other cloud services providers didn't. So your customers may have woken up one morning to discover, if they were outside the US in certain countries, that they could no longer access your company's website but your competitors' customers could because they were with a different cloud service provider. Stuff like this happens all the time, to say nothing of the squirrels that keep chewing through power lines and shutting down companies, right? So this is an ecosystem-wide thing. But leaders' behaviors are the key. 70% of customer obsession transformations fail. 70%. And they fail almost exclusively because leaders aren't behaving the way they need to behave at work. Leaders have to do 5 things. They have to measure, reward, model, unblock, and provide. I'm going to say a word about each one of these in turn. These are the 5 things to focus on if you're a leader and you're trying to help your company focus more on customers. Thing 1, measure. Take a personal interest in the kinds of customer insights your company is gathering to make sure you have the information you need to make customer-focused decisions. Don't just live with it if you don't. Make sure you get it. And then use those customer insights to make decisions and show employees that you're doing it. Because again, just like listening to customer calls or things like that, when you show employees that you're doing it, you show them that it's actually important. Model. You have to model customer focus in the way you do your job. I've offered a couple of examples here. For instance, if you have interactions with customers, make sure you're modeling a customer focus, obviously, in that. Also, when you're making decisions, budget decisions, other kinds of decisions, prioritize customer needs, and again, show employees that you are prioritizing customer needs when you make decisions. That can sound like a bit of a platitude, but it's not. We all know how this is. You get into making a decision, and there's this factor and that factor, and what about budget, and what about staffing, and what about this, and what about that, and before you know it, nobody's mentioned the word customer in the whole hour-long meeting. Right? I've been there. I know how that goes. Begin every meeting with a customer insight. That's a good one to do. I know there's some companies here that do it. Everybody should be doing it. Doesn't matter what the topic of the meeting is. Find some real information about customers. Maybe it's some data. Maybe it's a number or some numbers. Maybe it's a contact center verbatim. Right? Maybe it's a video you found on YouTube of a customer experience with your brand. Whatever the topic of the meeting is, start with some customer insight focused on the topic of the meeting. And you totally flip the script on the way the meeting's going to go. Same topic, same decisions to be made, they'll be made better. Just a few ideas. I encourage you, if none of these 3 examples speak to you, find a couple of things you do at work frequently that you could figure out a way to do more from the customer inward. And by the way, sometimes people say, especially senior leaders, especially leaders who are kind of deep behind the scenes in a company, they'll say that might make sense for the head of the contact center or the sales team's leaders or something like that, but not for me. I work on the risk management team or something like that. Everything, again, it's systemic. Everything everybody does trickles outward to affect the customer experience, whether for good or ill. So sometimes I ask people to just, come up with something they do at work every day that affects the customer. And if they can't come up with something, it means that their job has no purpose and should be eliminated. So you should come up with something. And then model it. Reward. Reward behaviors that contribute to customer obsession. Never reward for great customer feedback. You don't want to incentivize around customer feedback. That leads to gaming behavior. This is how you get an internet technician standing in your living room begging you for a 10 on the survey, or he's going to lose his job, his kids are going to go hungry. Right? This is how you get employees at Porsche stealing inventoried Porsche merchandise to give to customers as bribes for 5-star ratings. Right? Don't incentivize on feedback, incentivize on behaviors. I don't just mean money, whatever it is. Right? As you see, lack of recognition, that is our number 1 reason our data shows for burnout. Unblock. Identify and remove obstacles that prevent employees from focusing on customers. And as I mentioned when I mentioned Navy Federal, right, open up that oftentimes some of the blockers are policies and procedures that might seem necessary but turn out not to be. I could talk your ear off about that one. Over 50% of the time, a policy or a procedure that a company thinks is regulatorily required turns out to not be. It's just become ensconced in the company's culture. Right? So get things out of the way, whether it's bad tools or bad processes or bad culture or whatever. Get it out of the way. Cut stuff, don't add stuff. And then provide. Make sure that you provide employees with the right resources that they'll need to focus on customers. And when I say the right resources, I don't mean more resources. Remember when companies just kept adding collaboration tools over and over and over again, and before you knew it, you couldn't get any work done because everything was binging and bonging at you all the time? Right? That's what I'm talking about here. More isn't better. Get the right stuff. The obvious stuff, technology, budget, training and coaching, but also the less obvious stuff, psychological safety, time, right? You've got to provide those too. Now, I want to zoom in on these last couple of things, the unblock and the provide, the get out of the way, get things out of the way, and then make sure employees have the right resources. And I want to focus here on technology in particular, because I said I was going to come into a particular angle on how to become more customer obsessed. Here's where we're getting to the angle, because we're here for the next couple of days to talk about technology. And leaders who remove tech blockers and then provide the right tech resources, they create a technology environment that's conducive to employees focusing on customers and doing it in a way that's reliable and efficient. And by the way, is a better employee experience too. First, I want to address this at the level of technology strategy. A technology strategy that unblocks and provides, right, that's conducive to customer obsession, is what we call a future fit technology strategy. A future fit tech strategy is adaptive, creative, and resilient. Adaptive. What I mean here is it's a tech strategy that helps the company quickly reconfigure all of its business structures and capabilities when the environment changes, sometimes drastically, sometimes quickly, rather than being stuck in a rut. Second, creative. There was a lot of talk about this with the folks I was having breakfast with this morning about bringing humanity in more, keeping the humanity in when it's there, bringing more of it in. That's what I'm talking about here, because it's the technology that supports bringing that human element, that problem-solving element, that human touch of the experience into the customer and the employee experience. And then third, resilience. This is delivering on the brand promise regardless of what's going on in the world. And having that tech strategy across your platforms, sure, absolutely, your corporate technology practices, the policies and procedures around the technology, and your partners, the sorts of companies that you bring into your ecosystem and trust to help be part of how you provide value to customers, making sure that all typifies being adaptive, creative, and resilient. But now I want to zoom down to the level of tech tactics. Tactics are within, ideally, this future fit technology strategy, making sure that employees have the tools they need, the actual specific technologies, to focus on customers rather than getting mired in trying to find information or wrangle with some internal blockage or something like that. Lots of technologies contribute to this. Customer relationship management, customer feedback management, knowledge management. There are more kinds of technologies. These aren't the only three technologies, but these are the sorts of things I'm talking about. And of course, over the next couple of days, we're focused primarily here on knowledge management. So I want to say a little bit more about knowledge management in particular. Knowledge management can play a really good role in powering all four of those principles of customer obsession, because knowledge management technologies helps companies act from the outside in, from customers inward, helps them be led by customers by providing not just data, but insights, but answers and expertise. And to do so quickly, that's fast, and consistently throughout the customer lifecycle, ideally, right? So clearly, these sorts of technologies have a real role to play. Now, no one thing is in itself sufficient for customer obsession. Again, systemic, but it's certainly necessary. You can't become customer obsessed without it. And we've identified actually the top drivers of CX quality across industries. Remember those 13 verticals we study in the US and we study other verticals elsewhere? We ask, depending on the vertical, between, I believe it's 45 and 75 different drivers to figure out what actually improves CX quality for people. Not what people say is going to provide a better CX for them, but what actually does provide a better CX for them. Because customers aren't actually generally that good at figuring out what's going to provide a better experience. I actually did this as just an aside. I ran this analysis for the public sector a few years ago. There is a strong inverse correlation between what customers said was going to improve the experience and what actually did. The graph looked like an X. Statistically speaking, you'd be better off, if you were in the public sector, asking customers what they wanted than doing the opposite. I don't recommend it, but that's what the data showed. Right? Sometimes in the private sector, customers are better at it than that, but not always. So what we do is we can actually identify the drivers that actually matter. And when we look across verticals, we see year after year after year, all the way back to 2015, when we revamped the methodology of the CX index back then. Every single year, we see the same top 3 drivers rise to the top across verticals. The first communicates with me using plain language. Knowledge management obviously can play a role there by helping your employees understand what they need to say, the way they need to communicate, right? The knowledge they need to provide, and the way they need to provide it. One of my favorite examples of this was we were working with a nonprofit organization. And one of the things that the nonprofit organization, one of their key missions was to reduce tobacco attestation. And employees talked about reducing tobacco attestation, and they talked to the people they served about reducing tobacco attestation. Nobody knew what tobacco attestation meant. Employees weren't sure. The target population, they had no idea. It just meant using tobacco products. Right? But somebody had, used this phrase once, probably in like an onboarding training or something, and it just gelled. And nobody thought about it again, and nobody was actually thinking about understanding what actually resonates with their customers, and then making sure that everybody was consistent in the use of that kind of terminology. It goes deeper than this, obviously, but that's, I think, a particularly amusing example. Resolves my problems and issues quickly. Well, hey, what do you need to solve problems and issues quickly? You need to have the right knowledge. You need to get it where it needs to go at the right time, right? Obviously. And finally, customer service representatives answer all of my questions. Obvious. Knowledge management, it's right there in the name, right? Knowledge, making sure that the people who need the real insights can get them and can not only answer the question, but solve the problem, which is really what it comes down to. Because when it comes to CX, it's always all about the customer's perception, right? And this one I think is particularly interesting because we've researched this, and you can technically answer all of a customer's questions. You had 3 questions. I wrote them down, check, check, check. Did I answer all your questions? And the customer will say no. That doesn't make any sense. We all agreed these are the 3 questions you asked, and we agreed that you answered them. That doesn't make any sense. Well, your customers are human, they don't make any sense. When you dig into it, well, you answered the question, but you didn't actually solve the problem. You didn't answer the question that I should have asked, or the whatever, right? So whenever I get into this one, I really try to make sure that people go deeper than just check, check, check. I answered them all, success, right? Knowledge management can certainly be a key part in helping go deeper than that. And how does it really contribute to those 3 drivers, as well as other drivers too? Well, it contributes by improving on all 3 dimensions of CX quality. We call these the 3 E's of CX: effectiveness, ease, and emotion. Effectiveness, does the experience deliver the value the customer is trying to get? Can they do what they're trying to do? Clearly, if the person from the company can't help them, or steers them wrong or has to transfer them around or whatever, the customer can't do what they're trying to do. Ease. It can't be difficult for customers to do what they're trying to do. And again, clearly, if the person gives them wrong information or doesn't know or stumbles or this or that, that's not easy, that's a problem. And emotion. The experience has to leave customers feeling the way they need to feel. Now, that doesn't mean an emotional experience. That doesn't mean a melodramatic experience. If you go to Disney World, you want wonder and childlike delight. If you go through a TSA checkpoint, you want to feel safe, confident, and respected. Still emotions. Right? And insofar as your customers are human, emotion is actually the most important thing. And providing them with an experience that leaves them feeling confident, that leaves them feeling valued, that leaves them feeling whatever they need to feel, right, is a good customer experience. Clearly, knowledge management can play a role in that as well. And by the way, these are 3 independent variables. I got all kinds of math over all kinds of years that proves it again and again. You can create an experience that's effective, but neither easy nor emotionally positive. You can create one that's only easy, one that's only emotionally positive. You've got to focus on hitting all 3. By the way, especially that third one, because again, humans, primarily emotional. And providing the right technology, like knowledge management and other technologies that face employees rather than customers, helps a company succeed on the top drivers of EX quality too. Here are 2. There are 9 top ones. I decided to just pull out 2 that I think would be particularly relevant here. One is my company provides an environment in which I can be productive. Absolutely, you got to go looking around for information. You don't feel like you know what you need to know. You can't find the answers you need to find. Employees spend more time searching for stuff, doing low-value work in many cases, than they do actually providing great customer experiences. And customers don't like that. Employees don't like that either. Employees hate that. Employees want to end the day feeling like they did a good job for people. And my company is forward-looking and innovative. Companies that provide well-crafted, cutting-edge technologies that actually help them serve customers have employees who feel that the company is forward-looking and innovative. That doesn't mean more technology, that means the right technology. So, we've covered a lot of ground, but the key is, chances are your company is not providing a customer experience that is as good as it wants to provide. Even if you happen to be among one of those relatively few companies that improved CX quality in the past year, chances are you want to be better. And to do that, you have to make some major systemic changes. You can't just drive this one team harder or change one thing over here or fire this person and put a new person in place. You need to make major systemic changes. You need your entire company to put customers at the center of leadership, strategy, and operations. Your company needs to become more customer obsessed. And technology is a microcosm of this. Because like I said earlier, no one thing or even no group of things is sufficient to create customer obsession, but there are plenty of things that are necessary to create customer obsession. And having the right technologies is one of those things. And that's going to help you put the right principles, being customer-led, insights-driven, fast connected, to the center of leadership, strategy, and operations. And that is good for everybody. It's good for customers, it's good for the organization, it's good for employees, it's good for all of you. That's it. Thanks very much.